Ladies and gentlemen, this story from NPR came out October 17th, 2018. Poll: Rural Americans rattled by opioid plague. Many want government help. So things have gotten so bad in rural America with opioids, they want the government to come in and help them with this problem. Wow. Rural Americans are profoundly worried about the opioid plague in their local communities, and many are hoping government can help, according to a new poll from NPR. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. One quarter of rural Americans say opioids and other drug abuse is the biggest problem that faces their local communities. And you know what? Right now, not only is the opioids bad in their community, more people now get arrested in rural areas than urban areas now. But see, I think it's been that way for quite some time, but you know how it is when it comes down to us. They always try to seem like everything is extremely bad in comparison to them, and it's simply not true. It's not true at all. A similar share, 21%, say economic concerns are the biggest problems in their areas. No other topic even comes close to that. People and the government are the biggest problems, both registering at 5%. So you can see their opioid issue outweighs their economic concerns, according to people in rural areas. It's bad. It's so bad there that they're saying they don't even have law enforcement working, around the clock like they do in other areas of the country, because a lot of times they have enough money to pay maybe one or two cops to patrol the area. You I was reading stories where sometimes, other towns have to take over whenever their cops are off because they just don't have like a big police force in rural areas. In a country that has just been focusing on a number of years now on the economic problems facing people living in rural areas, the fact that opioid drug abuse plague literally is either the same or even for many people more serious than economic issues, in an extraordinary finding, said Robert Blankton, a professor of health policy and political analysis at Harvard H.T. Chan School of Public Health. When it comes to fixing those problems, Clinton voters, 72%, were more likely than Trump voters, 51%, to say that their communities would need outside help. Between those groups, there is perhaps less difference than their political ideologies would suggest. Among rural Americans who say their community will need outside help to solve its major problems, similar proportions of Trump voters, about 6 in 10, and Clinton voters, 7 in 10, believe the federal, state, or local government will play the greatest role. The major difference between these groups is the role they see for big business. And even then, the differences is modest. Among those who say their community will need outside help, Trump voters are more likely than Clinton voters, 18% versus 8%, to say they think big business will play the greatest role. National versus local. The opioid problem is not viewed uniformly across all of rural America. Opioids and other drug abuse rates, with especially high shares of people in Appalachia. Now, it is bad in Appalachia. I was even doing videos about that last year. It's exceptionally bad across Appalachia. 41% of people there say drug addiction and abuse are the biggest problem in their communities, compared with around 1 in 5 in the Midwest and around a quarter in the South and rural areas nationally. So, as you can see on this chart nationally, people view, and I showed this before in another video, the opioid problem at 25%, economic concerns 21 nationally. But in Appalachia, it's 41% of them believing that opioids is a huge problem, and 21% believe their problems are economic. So it does reflect in this chart. Okay. The findings is particularly striking as drug abuse barely register on many Americans' views of what the big problems in the nation are. And that's because they keep this out of mainstream news, ladies and gentlemen. If it was spoken about in mainstream news more often, then it would be an issue. But they purposely keep their drug problem. Sorry about that. Just dropped my phone. They see their drug problem as something to hide. Seriously, they are hiding their opioid issue at this point, at least attempting to. If it was bigger on mainstream, they would feel it's a bigger concern. Okay, so they're only concerned about the things that they see on mainstream news. I have noticed this about most Americans in this country, even back when I was a kid. If it's not on mainstream news, they're not going to be concerned about it. Drugs register at 1 or 2% on Gallup's regular poll of the most important problem facing the country today. Indeed, there are multiple instances in which rural Americans worry about their local problems differ from national views about the country's problem. And if you remember, I did articles on, in fact, I did a video about a year ago, and it was talking to people in rural America. And this one woman said, "Who isn't a drug addict here?" She said, "It's so many drug addicts in rural America. It's like, who's not a drug addict? It's like almost everybody you know is a drug addict in rural America. That's how bad it is." And because the problems are bad when it comes down to drugs, even HIV is rising in these same rural communities. A lot of needle sharing, and plus people having sex for drugs, and you're going to have those kind of things happening. Okay. For example, less than 1% of rural Americans list immigration as the biggest problem in their community. However, it is regularly one of the top issues that Americans list on that Gallup poll right now. And that's because immigration is constantly in mainstream news. I mean, just pay attention to the pattern. When mainstream news put it out there, they become concerned about it. When mainstream media don't talk about a certain issue like opioids, there's no concern for it. The crowd generally follows what mainstream media think is important. But When you come on social media, it's a whole different ballgame. Okay, the opioids um, epidemic and crisis and all these other labels they have is more prevalent on social media than it is on mainstream media. Okay, so however, okay, right now it's at 12% as recently as July. So when they took a poll on immigration, only 1% of people in rural America thought that was important, opposed to a greater number, 12% of people nationwide believing that is a huge problem. In fact, it is not that unusual for local and national priorities to differ. And I agree with that. I agree with that. Even in suburban areas, the problems that you can think of are going to be different from the problems that are nationwide. I definitely agree with that. For example, a number of polls have Republican voters say terrorism is the top issue or immigration. It doesn't show up when you ask people about their own lives or their own communities. Okay. So, I mean, these things are to be expected. And of course, they're going to say it's worse in their communities because they are seeing it a lot more in those rural areas, in those communities in rural America. They're seeing a lot of people zombified walking around their community, and they know who's on drugs. They do. They know who's on drugs in their community. You know, in fact, some of you might remember a story I did probably well over a year ago where it was a councilman that was trying to cut down on all of the EMT service that this one community was getting because they were going out to revive the same person over and over with Narcan. And they were saying in this Ohio community, almost everybody was a junkie. And they were spending a fortune on Narcan and the EMT service to the point where he wanted to put in place after 3 times the EMT and Narcan is cut off because he said it was draining this local community economically to continue to run around to all of these junkies. And I believe that was a rural community. But so you can kind of see why they would feel that way. Um, and they're just talking about recent polls showing that Republicans' assessments of their own finances dropped somewhat during the Obama presidency and increased in the past couple of years. However, those swings are far less dramatic than their views of the national economy. Roughly 6 in 10 rural voters backed Trump in 2016, according to exit polls. So, it's really a shame that this is going on, and another thing that the mainstream media do, they fluctuate in telling you how many people nationally are on opioids. Now, I've read some articles that say 11 million people are strung out on opioids. And I've read other articles that said it's up to 25.9 million people that are currently abusing opioids in the country. So, I mean, with that kind of fluctuation, it tells me they really don't have a true number at all. It don't, they don't. So this is America for you. Conceal what they don't want out there, especially if it's something that's going to make them look bad reveal anything like immigration where they feel they don't look bad in the whole thing. So I don't look bad when it comes down to immigration. So I can just go and keep attacking that. Typical. But please tell me what you think, ladies and gentlemen, about rural America wants the government to step in and help them with their opioid plague that's going on in their communities. Please leave your comment and subscribe. Don't forget to hit on the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace, family.